I am Doomsvince, and this is day 76 of Spawn Year.
As I hoped for, the future of Daniel Lanzos' world is a little brighter by the end of this arc, but I'm not exactly breathing a sigh of relief. While there wasn't a single shred of hope or levity in issue 2, it was quite successful because it managed to get me down. I was invested in both the world at large and in the protagonist's journey. I started to sympathize with him for the monumentally bad hand life had dealt him, and I wanted to see him persevere against the hordes of hell to prove the anti-pope's vulgar ideology that light must always give way to darkness wrong. By the end of this issue, Spawn has fought and killed most of the major named demons we've been introduced to, but I hadn't yet felt the need to mention since nothing was really done with them. He chooses not to kill his sister and her son, and regardless of a gargantuan and unprecedented use of power, his soul does not turn black and he does not fully lose his compassion or his humanity. The whole thing is quite predictable, and true to form for something called Spawn, I find myself taken out of the fantasy, because Spawn seems to win, not because he's beaten the odds with that bad hand thanks to his hope and resolve and his yearning to live up to his sister's high and positive expectations, but because the odds just weren't that bad to begin with. There's a lot of intense and exciting action this issue as Spawn fights the demons who hate him for turning his back on his calling. One is called Bune, who Spawn finishes off in a couple pages, and the other is Abaddon, the highest-ranking demon leader besides Spawn himself. Neither really has any personality. Spawn is trying to save Matthew, who Abel, controlled by Anti-Pope's insect concoction, tries to deliver to Abaddon on top of a giant spiral staircase of ribs and femurs. Why can't this graveyard have a spiral staircase of ribs and femurs? I'd sure get more exercise. Matthew stabs Abel, the poor, pious, godliest man in the land, in the neck, trying to save his own neck, but then those pesky skeletal hands sticking out of the staircase pass him off to each other up to the top, like a mosh pit at a Vertical Disturbed concert. Too bad all those damned souls couldn't just mind their own business. I have no idea why this epic climactic scene had to take place all the way up there, except that it looks really dramatic, and there's symbolic irony in a Hellspawn making a Hail Mary play in spite of the devil up in the clouds. Abaddon talks about all the horrible things that will happen to Matthew if he doesn't kill him now, when his soul will go to heaven. Otherwise, he'll be baptized as a child of evil, like Abel, and he'll be doomed for eternity. Too bad Fledgy and his genius cronies didn't factor in the abilities Fledgy gave Spawn into their master plan. And remember, Fledgy keeps encouraging Spawn to use said powers because it's supposed to make him give in to his darkness faster. Spawn tricks Abaddon, and instead of killing Matthew, he magically teleports him to wherever he wants to go, which is where his mother happens to be at that moment. Then Abaddon, in a fit of rage, makes like a Power Ranger monster and grows 3 times his original size. So Spawn, just because the giant demon threatens his family some more, elects to risk giving his soul over to Fledgy, and rather than calling on his necroplasmic Megazord, blows himself up in a giant mushroom cloud that has a 20-mile radius, inside of which everything, including any humans that were there, are most assuredly dead in the, quote, boiling tar that time will never cool. How's that for helping make a brighter future for the Earth? Good thing Madrid and Matthew were far enough away. Even if his powers include telepathy, and he knew exactly where Matthew wanted to go when he sent him there, how would he know how big his reckless tar bomb was going to be? Naturally, it ends with his hand popping out of the ground like a villain in the last 5 minutes of an equally predictable action movie, and we know he hasn't gone back to hell. I'm sure I can rely on the narration box implying that using up all that power hasn't suddenly turned him evil. What am I supposed to take from all this beyond an uncertainty of whether or not we'll get more stories about Daniel Lanzo and the utter disappointment that Spawn never battles Anti-Pope if that's the case? Is the moral of the story that the Masters of Hell are too sinister to understand the human condition? That Spawns never really lose all their power and they never give themselves over to hell because no matter what you do to the soul, there's always some good left? That's positive and endearing and all that, but if that's the idea, it makes for awful serialized storytelling, because once you give that away, there aren't any more stories left. The Lords of Hell start looking pretty stupid after a few millennia of giving unlimited power to people who run off and either use it for their own purposes or meddle in Hell's plans. And if Daniel can do all that and not turn evil, what are the stakes for him exactly? If there's nothing limiting his powers, then all this talk about his struggling with his humanity becomes moot. Sure, he does still struggle. There's one token panel where the urge to kill indiscriminately nearly overtakes him because he's using his power, but I don't buy it when he turns into Hiroshima Part 2 and we're led to believe he can still control that. In a high-concept fiction, when physical rules are set up and the characters are able to break those rules simply because we're told they're special, the story is copping out because it's built a conflict it doesn't know how to effectively resolve. And most of the questions I was meant to ask go unanswered, especially why Matthew is treated as so much more important to Fledge's manipulation of Daniel than his sister, and how he's a mirror of Daniel. He does stab a good man in the neck who wasn't in control of his faculties. Murder for a necessary reason, like Daniel did his whole life. But that's tacked on. He was called a mirror of Daniel before that. There's a lot of intriguing ideas conceptually, but ultimately executed like a typical Spawn comic. I guess Alan McElroy really does get Spawn. Now I'm depressed again. Signed, Captain Logan.